Okay, hi Nadine. Good afternoon, everyone. It's 3 o'clock and we're here for our weekly CARIMAC research seminar. And as we all know, our presenter this afternoon is Nadine McLeod. And this is one of Nadine's seminars, official formal seminars as part of her PhD process. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Christine. Is Christine on, Jason? I am not seeing Christine. To introduce Nadine.
Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Gordon Bell. Christine is not on as yet, but a few things that we are supposed to take care of before she comes on. That's supposed to take us up to a few minutes when she should be here. Oh, she is in. Dr. Gordon Bell, you can just give an overview of the seminars and then move down to the introduction.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Okay, I see Christine has joined us. Right, so our seminars are part of the CARIMAC research process. We have these seminars weekly. We'll be taking a little break for the summer session. And I think today is our last session. Before we leave, we will remind us when we resume the seminars. We'll get going in a second. We have others still joining us. So just bear with us for a minute. As I said earlier, this is this week's installment of the CARIMAC Research Seminar Series. We have these every Wednesday as part of our staple research activity at CARIMAC, and this has been going on for the past few years. The seminars are intended to provide researchers with an opportunity to share their research projects and research strategies. Training on the various aspects of the research process is also part of our scope of activities. The objective of the seminars is to foster what we call a thriving research environment here at CARIMAC, and of course to help us as faculty to reach UI's target of, well, the minimum 2 publications per year. So there is the benefit for students as well as staff. Of course, our MPhil PhD candidates use this forum also to complete their degrees and to do their formal seminar presentation. CARIMAC's goal through this initiative is to build stronger research relationships with staff, students, and our colleagues in academia and industry across the Mona campus, UI generally, of course, the wider community. Again, a warm welcome to all who joined us this afternoon. And we want to allow persons to introduce themselves, but I think we see most persons here are persons we know and who have been part of this process. So we will go straight into having our Christine, you're here, to introduce our presenter, Nadine McLeod. And we just encourage us to look out for other information for other seminars in the future. So we're going to go straight into asking Christine to introduce our presenter for this afternoon. Christine?
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Ms. Nadine McLeod. Ms. McLeod is a practitioner scholar who lectures in the Bachelor of Arts in Communication Arts and Technology program at the University of Technology, Jamaica. Having worked in broadcast journalism for more than 20 years, the former television news reporter and anchor has now transitioned into academia, with her research focus being the use of language in the media. Ms. McLeod is currently a PhD candidate in the Communication Studies program at CARIMAC. She holds a diploma in Media and Communication and a Master of Arts in English Language from UI, and a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of Technology, Jamaica. Please make welcome Ms. Nadine McLeod.
Thank you very much, Christine. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. Special welcome to my supervisor, Professor Devonish, co-supervisor, Dr. Gordon Bell. Thank you so much for coming. Let me share my presentation. Before I go on, can you indicate if you're hearing me clearly?
Yes, we are, loud and clear.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bell. So the title of my presentation today is the effects of the language of questioning on comprehension scores, the case of English language news broadcast, of English language radio news broadcast. Now, you may notice that the title has been slightly changed. That's because this is an ongoing research study, and since the initial name was given to CARIMAC, some adjustments were made, hence this title. This is a study about the understanding of radio news among 3 groups of Jamaicans. That's students from the Jamaica Foundation for Lifelong Learning, that's JFLL students. We had 105 of them participating in the study. University of the West Indies students from CARIMAC, 98 of them were respondents, and journalists from 10 media houses, as displayed on this slide. 37 of them also participate in the study, and they form what we call the media group in the study. This is my instrumentation. We used 8 radio news items in the study. The main instrument was a multiple choice questionnaire, which consisted of 2 questions. So we'll play the news item, and each news item would have 2 questions. One question tested literal comprehension, and the other question tested inferential comprehension. Now, each question had 3 answer options, and we'll talk about that later. And the respondents got a specially designed response sheet in order to answer the question. The procedure, we played a news item. The news item, of course, was presented in English, played the news item twice. Then we would ask a question about that news item. Respondents would be given an opportunity to answer the question. Then we'll ask a second question about the news item. And again, respondents would be able to answer the question. And this procedure would be repeated until all 8 news items were played and were answered by the respondents. The test was administered in 2 languages, English to one set of the respondents, and another set was asked in Jamaican Creole. The respondents were characterized based on 3 characteristics, and I have them here. Formal education, schooling, English language competence, and knowledge of the background to the news. And if you look at this diagram, you see that we have a lot of overlapping taking place. You know, formal education overlaps with English language competence, which overlaps with the knowledge to the background, knowledge of the background to the news. We're going to begin with formal education, formal schooling as a characteristic. Exposure to formal education means exposure to English for majority of Jamaicans, including myself, whose first language, my native language, is Jamaican Creole. Education also helps people to do better in a number of ways. So we're going to highlight about 3 ways here. Education, so we're at formal education now. It gives people an advantage in understanding the news items. It exposes them to the background information to the news items. For example, we know about general elections, and we probably hear a story about an election, general election. We would have learned about the process of general election at school, or any election at all, that you go to the polls to select a leader. In the case of Jamaica, your MPs, and then so when you hear the news item about a general election, you would have already, kind of have a basic understanding of what an election is, what happens in an election. So education also helps people to better, so we're still at formal education, it also helps people to better answer the questions, because we know that schooling it trains people to answer questions. That's basically why we go to school. That's a main part or a major part of your training at school. So we move now to English language competence. People with higher English language competence, people know more English, are those with higher education. Once again, because education exposes you to English. And in this study, we use education as an index for English language competence. People with higher levels of English language competence will also understand the news better because the news is presented in English. English language competence also gives people more access to the knowledge of background to the news, because the knowledge of the background to the news is presented in English. So having English language competence will let you understand the background to the news that you will bring to understanding the current news items, right? And then we go to knowledge of the background to the news and how it overlaps with the other two characteristics. Now, education influences knowledge of background to the news because you're exposed to the background to the news through information received at school, well, some of it, and the background knowledge to the news is also in English, as I said earlier. So English gives people direct access to the background to the news. So it's three characteristics, but it's kind of complicated because they are all overlapping with each other in some shape or form. So we've been talking about background knowledge. When we talk about background knowledge, according to Marsano 2004 and Cossette-Lent 2012, background knowledge is basically prior information that people already know about a particular topic. In this particular study, knowledge of the background to the news, we're talking about prior information that people would have already known before listening to the news items, and this information helps them to better understand the news. We spoke about three answer options earlier. So we'll play the news item, and then we'll ask two questions per news item. And for each question, we had three answer options, right? Now, one answer option is a right answer, another one is a near right or a distractor, and one is a wrong answer. Now, we examine the responses or the performance of the groups through the lenses of two scoring systems. One is the 210 scoring system, and one is the 200 scoring system. In the 210 scoring system, if a respondent gets a right answer, then that respondent would be given 2 marks. A near right answer, that respondent would be given 1, and a wrong answer, you'll get a 0. So here we also consider the near right answer. So hence you have, it's kind of right, kind of real, not too wrong, not too right, kind of right. So there's a little bit of shade of gray right there. While the black and white scoring system, so we look at it through the lens of black and white. Is either you're right or wrong. Still 3 answer options. The right answer would attract 2 marks, the distractor 0, and the wrong answer 0. So we had 2 different scoring systems that we used to look at the performance of the members of the groups. Now, for this particular presentation, we're only going to look at one hypothesis, and that is the scores for the test administered in the Jamaican language, which is Jamaican Creole, JAMC, JC hereafter. Well, those scores will be higher than the scores for the test administered in English. Now, the reason we came up with this hypothesis because we thought that because for the majority of Jamaicans, their first language or their native language is Jamaican Creole, that of course, asking them questions, communicating with them in Jamaican Creole would yield higher scores on the test performance. Their performance would be better in that language than it would be in their second language. The focus of this particular presentation is on the performance of the groups, and groups here we're talking about JFLL, UE, and the media, the journalists, and this performance is based on, we're looking at test language. Now, in this study, we call JFLL and UE group non-experts and the media group experts. The results that the answers were analyzed using Kruskal-Wallis and Mann-Whitney. Both versions of the test, that's the 210 and the 200, they basically gave more or less the same results. However, for this presentation, we're going to focus on the 210 scoring system, the shades of gray scoring system. And you're looking at the results for overall comprehension. And by overall comprehension, we're talking about the entire test. How did the respondents in the groups score on the overall test? And we're talking about all the variables coming together to form overall comprehension. Now, as you can see here, it's the Croskwell-Wallace results showed that JFLL got, for English, they got 43.49. That was their mean rank. And it is higher than their Jamaican because their score was higher than their Jamaican, in English, than the Jamaican test. Now, this gave a negative support. We're saying that it's negative support for the hypothesis because, remember, the hypothesis stated that you would get more in Jamaican than you would get in English. And the same thing here for the US students, they also got more in English, causing them to score, to rank, higher than in Jamaican, where they got 69.38 for English and 64.28 for Jamaican, also negative support. But the media group, it was different. They basically, their scores or their mean rank basically supported the hypothesis, which said that the respondents would have gotten more in Jamaica than they would get in English. And right here, we're looking at the Jamaican for media. I'm looking for my cursor. The Jamaican for media, 104 as opposed to 88 for English, which is lower than the Jamaican. KW, Croskwell-Wallace results, statistically significant. It is less than 0.05. P is equal to 0.00. The number of people participated in the Jamaican test, 120, and the number for the English was 122. So I'm going to move, but I have moved to the literal comprehension results now. When we talk about literal comprehension, we're talking about basic comprehension. And you're looking now at the results for basic comprehension. How did the members of the group, how did the groups do as it relates to literal comprehension? Once again, JFLL and UA scored higher, or higher, thus their mean ranking, ranks were higher for English than they were for the Jamaican. And the negative support again for the hypothesis because they scored more on English than they did on the Jamaican test. The reverse for media, for the media group, they scored more on the Jamaican test than they did on the English test. Once again, support for the hypothesis from the media group, from the journalists, P is equal to 0.00, meaning that it is statistically significant. Now let's look at the score for inferential. When we talk about inferential comprehension, we're talking about, this is where the respondents had to dig deeper to understand these news items. So inference is basically where we reach a conclusion on the basis of reasoning, on the basis of background knowledge. And remember that the background, the knowledge is in English. Right? So if you don't understand English, and chances are, you may score, your performance may be a little bit lower on the inferential test. Once again, we found out that JFLL and UA, they were ranking higher, 48 for JFLL as opposed to 47, for UA 65 as opposed to 60, resulting in negative support for the hypothesis from both groups, while the media group journalists had 97 as opposed to 81, resulting in support or positive support for the hypothesis. P is equal to 0.00, meaning that it is statistically significant. Let's now move to high background information news items. And for these news items, you would have to know a lot of background information to understand them. And here, if you notice that the media group got 98.94, that's the highest among all of them. For Jamaican, that's their ranking, Croskwell-Wallace, according to the Croskwell-Wallace results. And for English, 85.61, providing support for the hypothesis that they did better in Jamaican. And the UA and the JFLL group did better in English, 46 as opposed to 44, and 66 as opposed to 60. it was, the same story for low background information as it relates to the hypothesis results. Negative support again from JFLL and UA, and positive support from the media group. Low background information, unlike high background information, you don't need a lot of background information to understand these news items. And here, KW results show that it was statistically significant, p is less than 0.05, and n is the number of people who participated in the study. So those are the results so far. Hypothesis results summary, we summarize JFLL and UA, we call the non-experts. They performed better in English with all variables right across the board. They performed better in English for the in this particular study, and for the media group, they performed better in Jamaican as it relates to all the variables that were used in the study. So the focus is on the performance of the groups, expert versus non-expert, based on the language of testing. Now, we found out that the experts, the journalists, scored the highest in all cases. Those that you see here, the results that you see here, and the other results in the study. And the journalists also scored higher on Jamaican Creole test than they did on English. This is a summary, and the non-experts scored higher on English than they did on the Jamaican test. Now let's look at why. We're realizing that it is the way experts learn different from non-expert that affects their performance. But before we go into that, let's delve a little bit into how we divided the characteristics, why we call journalists experts, why we call JFLL and UA people non-experts. The JFLL students, 105 of them, they were, at the time of the study, students in a basic literacy program. Some of them were, and some of them were students who were preparing for the CSEC exams. And since for majority of Jamaicans, exposure to schooling means exposure to English, then they would have the lowest level of, or presumed level of English language competence in the study, and background, and also low background knowledge to news in the study. So they're considered to be the novice in the group. The US students, for matriculation to the University of the West Indies, you need to pass English at Cape, GCE, perhaps CSEC, and maybe a diploma with it. And these students would have, so just to get into UA, you would have had some amount, of English language competence. Let's call it mid-level English language competence. And these students were CARIMAC students, which means that they were exposed to news, so they had some background knowledge to the news. The journalists, and they're competent beginners. Now, the journalists consisted of 90% of them reported that they completed university or college. That is 33 out of 37 of them. So they would have the highest level of English language competence because English language competence is indexed by education. And of course, because they work in English, they work with English, as a language of communication in news, they would have had a solid, background knowledge to the solid English language competence, and they work in news, so their background to the news would have been solid. The mean years of experience for the journalists in this was 10.2 years, which we rounded off to 10 years, and we know that Erickson 1993 and Gladwell 2008 says it takes 10 years or 10,000 hours of practice for people to become experts. So because these are the experts, we call these two the non-experts in the group. So the explanation for the results, why the results? Why is it that JFLL and US students are scoring better on the English test than the Jamaican Creole test, and the media group, the journalists, are scoring better on the Jamaican Creole test than they're scoring on the English test? We found out from the Committee on the Development in Science of Learning, CDSL 2000, hereafter, that experts learn differently from non-expert and experts. And they did a lot of studies with physicists, mathematicians, teachers, engineers, all kinds, chess players, all kinds of experts. So we know that the experts have more background knowledge. No surprise there. They're experts. They've been in it from, what we call Phillips, a very long time now. So of course they would have more background knowledge. The surprising thing is what they do with the background knowledge. So we found out that they chunk and they organize and process the information differently from non-experts. So where's the evidence? Where's the evidence in this study that these people, that the journalists are doing that? So evidence for more background knowledge, the media group did better than all other groups, right? The media group no more. Evidence in the direct variable that is linked to high background information, the media group did better on high background news information, that variable, than they did on low background news information, and they did better than everybody else when you look at the entire results and relate it to the other groups in the study. So where's the evidence that they organize and process information differently from non-experts? So what we're realizing is that the experts file the information in their native language, and they filed it in their native language because they had deep understanding. And we found that with researchers Han, Salbach, and Grabner 2017, we examined what happens when a bilingual acquires knowledge in one language, and then that person is required to apply that knowledge to solving a problem in another language. Han et al. Hereafter labeled the process language switching. It's language crossover that happened, and they said that it comes at a cost. Han et al. Basically stated that bilinguals perform better when asked to apply knowledge acquired in one language to solving a problem in that same language than when they are required to use that knowledge to solve a problem in another language. So here's a mechanism that happened now. The news was presented in English to all respondents. For the experts and the journalists, when the questions were asked in Jamaican Creole, having fully understood the news items and the questions and everything, the information, the journalists who are experts in the field, they had deep understanding. So they stored it in their, let's call it the native language part of their brain, right? So let's call it their native language deep understanding box. So they put it in that box because they have deep understanding. So when they were asked a question in Jamaican Creole, they went into that part of their brain, the native language part, and they retrieve the information easily. Hence, they scored higher on the Jamaican Creole test than they did for the English test. This is not to say that they don't understand English. They did very well on the English test, but for the mechanism for the English test was a little bit different. So the news items were played in English. The journalists were asked the questions in English for the English test. Now remember that they have the information stored in the Jamaican Creole deep understanding because they have deep understanding. So they put it in the native language part of their brain. So they had to go into that part of their brain now, and they had to cross to English in order to process the information better. And in that language crossover, it comes at a cost according to Han et al. And that is why they did better in Jamaican Creole than they did in English. For the non-expert, it was a little bit different for the non-expert. When the JFLL and US students were asked the questions in Jamaican Creole, JAMC, the news items were played in English. They were asked the questions in JC. They too reach into the deep understanding Jamaican Creole part, of their brain. But guess what? It wasn't there because they did not obtain deep understanding. They had the questions stored, or the information, not questions, sorry. They had the information stored in their procedural language, which is English. That's a language that we learn in school. We learn how to answer questions with English. We're comfortable in our comfort zone. So they had it in their procedural language, the procedural language part of their brain. So when they were asked in Jamaican Creole now, they had to transfer it now from the English procedural language part now to the Jamaican Creole part. And then there is some kind of language crossover. And because of that, I want to say language switching, but I know that that's not language switching. Because of the language crossover, it comes at a cost, according to Han et al. And so they did better they didn't do quite as well in Jamaican Creole as they did in English. In English, though, because they had it stored in the procedural part of their brain, the English language, where they store English language now, they just reach into that, retrieve the information, and of course, they did better on the English test, sorry, than they did on the Jamaican Creole test. Conclusion. Experts have better background information or more background information, and we have evidence here than the non-expert. But experts also have a superior filing system, which allows them to do better, to better organize and process information, to better chunk the information. And in order to access that superior filing system, you have to communicate with them in the language that they are most comfortable in the language that they have deep understanding. And that for us is Jamaican Creole. Well, for the people in the study and by extension, many of us would be Jamaican Creole. Now, this brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Any comments, any questions?
Okay, thank you, Nadine, for that really interesting presentation. And I know persons are waiting with questions that they would like to direct to Nadine. So the floor is open for questions. There. Any questions? Yeah, let me look in the
Any comments, any addition to the research?
Alpha Obika wants to know.
Okay. Thank you very much. So Alpha is asking, coming out of your study, what are the implications for policymakers as it pertains to news in Jamaican Creole? The ones, based on the study, the ones who are really understanding, who have deep understanding, the journalists, are the people who understand, who are getting, who are performing better on Jamaican Creole. So, and the ones, so one could say you have to have, a high level of English language competence in order to fully grasp the news. Of course, it wouldn't be for everything because you have literal, basic understanding, inferential, and high background. So perhaps policymakers and media managers, because it's practice, it's implication for not only policymakers, but it's also for practitioner, media managers. They should, for me, I think that they should reconsider if there is really information loss. So you put so much into news, you put so much into producing the news, and there is information loss. It's in terms of deep understanding and the crossover and the loss that happens when you have to cross from one language to the next language. I think they should reconsider the language of communication. I think for me, they should look at the value. We know that the bottom line is money, so they should look at the value, reconsider the language of communication. I would perhaps, reconsider communicating or using Jamaican Creole as perhaps one of the language of communication, main language, primary language of communication for news. So if I were to look at the practical implications for the audience, for news audience, for media audience, that is what I would want them to do. Small technical question, why was the reason for using, because the data, I'm so sorry, Mr. Mohammed, Dr. Obika, is that okay? Okay, all right, so Nick Mohammed is saying, small technical question, what was the reason for using Cross-Cornwallis KW instead of standard ANOVA non-normal? My data was non-normal, non-normally distributed, so we decided to use Cross-Cornwallis and Man-Whitney. Cross-Cornwallis, where you have 3 independent variables, and Man-Whitney for 2.
Okay. one new question. All right. Are there any other questions?
Yes, Dr. Bell, JLUUA, hand is up.
Right, go ahead. JLU, I think that's, go ahead.
Well, it's really JLU. Thanks.
Dr. Farquharson.
Listen, me come bright and early for the presentation and then call come in. So
Sure.
if the question full. Closer, I heard some of what you said closer to the end, and you were relating as a part of the conclusions. You're trying to understand or kind of theorize over what is happening.
Yes.
You were leaning towards some things that seemed very cognitive in terms of in what your participants are doing cognitively, mentally. And I wanted to know if you had any basis for drawing those conclusions. So what is it in your data, in your study, could give you some sort of footing for taking the analysis in that direction? Or in other words, on what basis are you claiming to be looking inside their brains?
Okay, so the variable that we're using is the high background information. Based on the results, we don't have much here about what's happening to them cognitively. But however, how they relate to how they scored on high background information and how they scored on inferential comprehension says a little bit about what is likely to be taking place cognitively.
Okay, I hear. So all right, so so
we're using that, and we're also using the literature to look at how bilinguals operate when they have to cross from one language to the next.
Okay, I hear you. I just wanted to know that you had a basis for being. So you're saying the literature says that certain types of information are retrieved in a particular way, are stored in particular places, and based on that, you're linking that to
what a deep understanding. You store the information in a particular place.
All right. Okay. Cool.
Okay.
Anthony Lewis has a question. I see a hand.
Yes.
Dr. Lewis, how are you?
Not too bad. Thanks very much, Dr. Gordon Bell, and thanks, Nadine, for that presentation. I want to follow up on Dr. Farquharson's intervention because I had a similar concern. I would love to see the presentation again because there are some other pieces that I would love to be able to line up with what you intended to do at the outset. That's what you're proposing that you would do, and the conclusions you're drawing. Where I'd go a little further than Dr. Farquharson in terms of what you just responded and what he was asking is whether or not the models that you are looking at are replicated in how you went about conducting your study to be able to draw your conclusions in the way that you're drawing them. You follow? Because yes, the literature might say X or Y, but is the literature that you're looking at working with a certain set of paradigms and methodologies, and are those then reflected in your work for you to be able to draw those kinds of conclusions?
Sure. I haven't seen that in the literature that I have so far. As I said, it's an ongoing research, but I can check some more.
Yeah, because there are certain other kinds of conclusions that I think could be drawn or might be better drawn based on how you set up the study, what you intended to do, and then what you're getting as your results.
Sure.
And then I'm not sure going down that cognitive pathway actually that you have sufficient to justify going in that direction.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. Any other questions? Yes, I see. Yes, Prof. Devonish.
Okay, right. Two comments. First of all, I think saying this to Nadine, that both Joseph and Rohan's points are going to be crucial for us to consider. So that, I mean, there's a value of this, so that people raise the right questions. Swinging it around just a bit to go on the defensive now. So like if I were in your seat, what I would have said to them in defense, in partial defense, is that we have an interesting situation in which the JFLL group and the UE group are doing what we expect. That is that they do better at the easy stuff, right? So right across the board in both languages, they do better at literal questions than they do with the questions requiring inference. And similarly, they do better at low background information than high background information. The weird thing is that this other group, they don't just simply do better in Jamaica, but they turn everything on its head. They do better at high background and low background. They do better. We would have expected them, had been able to do equal, but they do better, statistically significantly better at high versus low. And they also do statistically significantly better at inferential than literal. So now I don't fully answer their question. It doesn't fully secure your position. But what I would say is that it therefore causes one to want to investigate or pursue the cognitive route a bit further, right? But I think the warning that they're giving, well, what we will have as supervisors to do is really to work with you to find the literature on experts operating in the kinds of context that you ask these people to operate in, right? You know, basically answering questions, responding to questions and so on. So I'm saying that the issues that are being raised are very important for you, right? That I'm suggesting as a partial response to why we are going in that direction is that it is not just that they're doing better in Jamaican than in English, but they are reversing the process, reversing the thing. In other words, they're doing better at hard questions than they are at easy ones. And that's weird because you would expect, even with experts, that you would do better at the easy stuff than the hard stuff. But in fact, the experts, in the case of the media group, are doing better at the difficult stuff than they are the easy stuff. And that is interesting. And that definitely warrants investigation along the cognitive route, while not at all necessarily effectively answering the queries being raised by both Joseph and Rohan. Thanks.
Thanks, Prof. Thanks. And hands are up again. Joseph, go first, and then Rohan.
Okay, thanks, Prof. I was wondering whether, because the group that's doing better at the hard stuff is that the media
group.
Media group, who are your professionals? They know the discourse genre, and I wonder if, being experts, they become careless with the easy stuff. So it's probably shock that you're even asking them.
But shouldn't it come automatic? Shouldn't it be automatic retrieval for them? There'd be no room for them to be careless with the easy stuff.
No, not necessarily. Let me use a physical and a mechanical one. In the good old days when I used to work out, I got more injuries from lifting lightweight than from lifting heavyweight. I think it's only once that I ever had an injury from lifting heavyweight, and I don't think I could have even done anything about that. most of my injuries were from lifting light weights. And that is because, and in every one of those situations, it's because I was careless. I said to myself, oh, this light. And so I take it up with my hand in a particular way, or, you know, and so, you know, the way it might slip or my hand might twist in a particular way. And so I'm saying that it's quite possible that your experts, because the there's no challenge in the easy question, they become careless with it. But with the hard question, they're paying sufficient attention to it. And I think we're all like that. We're all like that. I'm sure you've gone into exams, and it's the thing that you're absolutely sure you would do well on, that you actually do poorly on, and the thing that you thought you would fail, you do well on. This is because you're very aware of your limitations on the hard stuff, and you pay extra attention there. That's my theory.
Dr. Ferguson, that is something that we will explore, but for all cases, looking at both scoring systems, the experts did better. All variables across the board, they did better. And even the unexpected findings, they did better on English, on Jamaican Creole than they did on English. So it's every single, all the easy stuff, the hard stuff, the unexpected stuff, everything, they did better on the other, on Jamaican than they did on English. But yes, it's definitely something that we will consider. But I'm just saying that for all the variables, that's what's happening.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Joel. Anthony, Rohan?
Yes, I like the response that Prof. Devonish gave, because I think that was part of what I was alluding to, that there are alternative routes of investigation that are opening up in relation to the findings, and that those might be more usefully pursued than this cognitive approach that sounds almost speculative. You see, if the data says that X group is performing better, you have to then look at why are they performing better. Yes, look at what are the variables that differ between this group and the other two groups. One of the things that was mentioned by Dr. Farquharson is the fact that this group knows news discourse. Is there something about news that is that's more relevant to this set of findings than the language that we're not paying attention to? I think that's one of the avenues I would pursue, the nature of the news production that they are benefiting from more than everybody else. I don't think you can escape that kind of investigation, given that they're the ones who are doing better.
Something
more obvious, in my mind, than to be making assumptions based on literature in a study that hasn't replicated what has been done in those other studies. Unless you can demonstrate that you're replicating what was done in other studies, then the most obvious route to pursue is what is different about this group, this news group, versus these other two groups in relation to the content that you have in front of you.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lewis. Prof. Devonish, I see your hand still up. Is that another comment or question, or was your hand up from before?
No, sorry, now I forgot to take my hand up.
Okay.
Okay.
I just have a quick question, Nadine, and I tell you, I have not thought about it until I listened to you. Is it possible, could we possibly conclude from this too that maybe our journalists may even do better at reporting if they were free to report in Creole? You're saying that their response to the questions asked in Creole showed better comprehension and so. And I'm wondering, I'm just stretching the point now, just, you know, the thought just crossed my mind. I wonder how would the standard of reporting now? Maybe, do you think it's possible that, and this is going to your experience as a practitioner, what would they do better as reporters if they were free to report freely in Creole? I'm just wondering, what do you think?
What I can tell you as a former practitioner, many times I'll go on scenes and I'll ask people questions in English and they don't understand, and then I'll ask them ask them in Jamaican Creole, and they would say, oh, now that you ever say, that's what you were saying, that you did say, now that you ever say, and the understanding was better there. So perhaps we could also look at that in terms of the understanding of the news report in Jamaican Creole, if people would grasp that better.
Yeah, because I know from my discussions with practitioners that in the work of investigating and interviewing, they use the Creole because they have to use it to engage Creole speakers. But in formal presentation now, they're expected to.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering how things could probably be different if they could be free to use the Creole across this. I know it sounds like I'm, you know.
And Dr. Bell, I'm talking about words that we take for granted that everybody knows. Simple words, literal English, authentic English words. People ask you to repeat yourself, and you have to, I want to say break it down, but being exposed to sociolinguistics, I'm not going to say break it down, because speaking in Jamaican Creole is not really breaking it down. It's speaking in another language that provides understanding for people who understand that language better than the other language.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Dr. Farquharson, I think you may be our final question as I look at the time, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back and remember it's half of the story we get.
Sure, I can come and sit with you and I can give you the entire story.
Oh, wow. So I was thinking again, if it is that so the JFL group and the students are doing good on the lower level stuff, the recall stuff, but they're not doing so well on the inferential stuff. That is what we would kind of expect. And the media practitioners are doing well on everything across the board, which would say to me that it is probably then something about the genre, that no matter if you are a US student, which means you have a year or two of university education, or you are in JFLL, news just difficult to understand. There are some things that you're not going to get unless you are somebody who is familiar with how news is structured. And it is the knowledge of how news is structured that helps you to parse the full content and meaning of the news. That's it.
But what do they? Okay, Dr. Farquharson. The media group also has two other characteristics that we're ignoring that is better than the non-expert groups. They completed university, means that they have education, and they also had presumed English language competence that is attached to the education. But the UE group, looking at what you said in terms of people have to have an understanding, a kind of high level of understanding of the news in order to understand the news, because perhaps it is that the news just goes over people's head if they don't have this kind of characteristic. But the UE group would come the closest to it. This particular group that we use in the study, the CARIMAC group that we used in the study, and they too are showing, less lower understanding than the media group. Dr. Ferguson?
Yes, I know, because they are not as familiar with the genre as sticking to that story.
So you're saying it's familiarity with the genre that's causing the great understanding or the high level of understanding by the media people?
You can't expect a student studying surgery to perform an operation at the same level as a trained and certified surgeon.
Okay.
Could I? Yeah, I was going to the literature on experts and expertise focuses on precisely the thing that Joseph is pointing out about the kind of information which is pretty abstract, as you quite rightly say. An expert in news knows how it's structured, etc. Now, what I would say to you, Nadine, is that provided that you are able to establish that in the literature, and I'm saying based on my little knowledge of the literature, it's so that the kind of abstract processing that we are talking about is precisely the thing that Joseph is referring to, i.e., this, it's not just news is not just news to a news person, a news expert. News, they know the structure of it, they sense it. It's like music to a musician, right? And the literature says that's what gets stored wherever it is stored, and therefore supports your argument. Now, obviously, one person's speculation is as strong as another one, but the key point is that the story that Joseph is putting forward actually fits in with the story you may want to tell, having done more work. Okay?
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Well, I think we all appreciate the discussion this afternoon. Thank you, Nadine, for your responses and for the way you have engaged the questions and facilitated this discussion. There are no further questions or comments. I want to just express gratitude on behalf of the entire CARIMAC cohort to Nadine McLeod, our presenter. And Nadine is one of us, so thank you, Nadine. And for all who have attended this afternoon for making this session another really productive one. We're taking a little break for the summer, and you can all look out for the flyer that will announce the next session and the next presenters. We will use Mona messaging, the university's internal communication system, and we encourage our attendees to circulate the information when it's out, because we really like to have students as well as colleagues from other institutions joining us. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you in September. And have a good summer and get some rest, folks. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.